Okay. So do you see anything now? Because that says it says I'm streaming. It gives me the option to stop streaming or end broadcast. All right. Very good. Thanks. All right. We finally are getting my act together here. Put my headphones in. All right, I'm just going to get this set up to record here. I had a path set up, and unfortunately, I ended the first broadcast, and I got to reset some of this stuff up, which is a pain. So bear with me, folks. That's not good. Okay, folks, I am apologize for the late start here. I am 5 minutes late. I like to be punctual. I've got some things I'm struggling with here. I don't have a dual monitor set up, so that makes it hard for me to see the chat. So let me just get that going here. So I can see that. Okay, very good. I've got chat going now. Okay, thank you guys for being so patient with me. It's been a couple years since I've done a live stream, and I'm doing some new software and stuff now. Let me just get my earphones on, and I wanted to just touch base with people and say hello, and this, I thought it was time anyway. Good time to do it. So yeah, I'm taking a little break right now. I did that monkey series, which was really kind of took it out of me a little bit. And I oftentimes, this time of year, as I'm going into the holidays, I start to kind of figure out what I'm going to do next year for the 2026. And this time I've got about 30 bands already planned for next year, and I hopefully can do half of them. And I do take your requests. So unfortunately, I wish I could do them all. And I usually have to be very selective. And oftentimes, it takes me quite a while to research them. And typically, I'll spend sometimes several months just getting my outline ready. So that's what takes me a long time. And I can't, if somebody were to suggest something, hey, do this, I can't just turn around and do it in a month. It usually takes me some time. So anyway, oh, geez, now I've lost something here. Bear with me, folks. Okay, there we go. My chat is back. Okay, so let's look. We've got. Is this about the monkeys? Yeah, I did several in a row. In fact, the reason I'm doing this live stream has more to do with a couple of canceled interviews that I had that I'm going to reschedule. There was a monkeys related interview I was going to do, and I'll save that for. I'm not going to. I'll surprise you on that. So I'm just looking back here on some of my comments to catch up here. Eli Miller, good to see you, Eli. Dan, good to see you. Megan, thank you for your help. This is now that I've got my feet wet, and this shouldn't be an issue. Is a history of the band in the works? Actually, Gonzo Duke, thanks for asking about that. I do have. I technically don't have it started yet, but I just appeared on a podcast called. I should have brought that up. I will be showing you something that I just appeared on lately to talk about the band. So it's another podcast on Curlis Mania. That's the name of the podcaster, Tom Curlis. And he does a show. It's kind of similar topics to mine. He brings on guests, talks about all kinds of bands. And that will probably be out today or tomorrow. So I will let you guys know when my discussion on the band comes out. So that he asked me, I've been getting a lot of invitations to be on people's streams and their podcasts lately. And I accepted that when I thought, you know what? I'm not ready to talk about the band, but let's do this. So I started playing my band albums, and you can see some of them behind me here. And I prepared myself to be on Tom's YouTube channel. And so, yes, I have kind of started the band. So those of you who are fans of the band, I think will like that discussion. Okay. What is your take on the Lost Weekend? That's a big question, David. Well, how do I sum it up? Let me see if I can sum it up in a sentence here. It was more of a found weekend that Lennon, there's all this angst amongst Beatle fans, the Paul versus John Beatle fans, that say that Paul McCartney is a revisionist in the Beatles' history. Well, so is Lennon. This idea of the Lost Weekend, that he didn't know what he was doing, he was drunk all the time, very much overstated. Interesting period. The music he created is okay. Most people know the story, but I did interview May Pang on this channel, and she gave me about a half hour of her time, and she had, I guess it was her video, her documentary was out, which was very good. May has a specific perspective, obviously, and it's also interesting to hear Mick Jagger's account of that period, David Bowie's, Harry Nilsson's, people that were friends of John Lennon, that kind of were partying with him, but I think the partying aspect was much overblown. Okay, all right, so as I go through oh, thank you, Gonzo. Yeah, the Monkey series, thank you. That was, no super chats. I should do a super chats. Megan, if you're out there, send me a link so I can figure out how to do a super chat. I'm kind of at a disadvantage here. I don't have a multiple monitor setup, which is preferred for live streaming, and hopefully the next time I do this, I can have that ready. Matt, how about Dylan? Yeah, Dylan is somebody I do plan to do, and I have kind of there's a way I think I want to roll out some of these artists on this channel. So this month or next month marks my 6th year on YouTube doing this channel. And I had a 10-year plan with a 5-year option, which I will probably take. I will probably culminate, there'll be some kind of, Dylan will kind of cap something off, I believe. Dylan is a tough one for me to do because I am a music person first and a lyric person second. And many Dylan fans are lyric people first. So there's a whole literary side to understand about Dylan. So I want to have a better feel for that before doing any kind of extensive history on him. But it will be done, and I think it'll be worthwhile me doing. All right, we got some more. Dylan would take about 15 videos. Well, okay, like many of you have probably noticed, when I do an artist that goes well into the 70s and beyond. I don't spend much time talking about the 80s music. This is a 60s channel. All of these artists had all their biggest influence in the 60s. Dylan's influence was the biggest in the 60s. Was he still relevant in the 70s? Yes. But he was spotty in the 70s and even more so in the 80s. So typically, a Dylan video would probably go pretty in depth up till Blood on the Tracks, and then anything after that would be summed up. I mean, I could go into the 90s. It's not my thing. I don't like a lot of these 60s artists that by the 80s were essentially nostalgia acts. Their music they were coming out with, some of it ended up being good, most of it not that good. You know, some people got lucky. Dylan has had some stuff later years which is people regard highly. So he's a minority in that area though. So I mean, it is an issue of relevance. So I mean, again, this is a 60s channel, and I don't want to bore people to death with a 15-part thing on Dylan, which most people just wouldn't watch. And I have to be selective because I have to, in some cases, save fans from themselves thinking that they want everything when they really don't. You know, you want that third donut, you really don't. So, okay. Invisible Ray, those Final Monkeys albums were embarrassing. That one where there should be 4 heads on sleeve, but they could only afford 3 monkeys. Yeah, the Monkeys series, I really enjoyed doing that one, and that's a group that totally fizzled out. A perfect example of these 60s bands who couldn't cross into the 70s. I mean, their time was up, and the kind of music the Monkeys did in the 60s wasn't really being done in the 70s. You had early 70s pop, which similar, but if Last Train to Clarksville was released in 1971, I don't think it would have done anything. But yeah, I think the Monkees really it's an unusual story in that when they fizzled out very drastically. But then their comeback, the reunion, that was a renewing of them, of their entire, I guess, brand. And you had a company like Rhino Records really backing them and reissuing their stuff very faithfully. So that all worked out for us Monkees fans, and that's how I was able to get back into the Monkees in a very big way. Hello, Matt. Are you going to do Rolling Stones history at some point? Kind regards from Denmark. Thank you, Nico. Nico plays guitar. Yeah, of course I'm going to do the Stones. Can't wait to do the Stones. I actually started kind of outlining it. When I first started this channel 6 years ago, I started outlining the Stones. Then how would I do this? How am I going to break this down? And I really haven't revisited the topic yet. I've actually been accumulating information. Something will catch my eye, and like I've got Anita Pallenberg's book. I've got several Stones books. So the research has been ongoing these last couple of years on the Stones. So when I'm ready to do the Stones, I will have a lot of stuff at my fingertips that I can dive in. What I don't like to do is say, well, let's start working on, pick a band, the Grateful Dead. I don't have anything on them right now. How am I going to, I don't want to do that. In the case of the Dead, I actually do have stuff. That's another tough one to do. And I have kind of some ideas of how to go about doing that. So there are several groups like the Dead, the Stones, the Who, Velvet Underground, I suppose, Dylan, that would require multi-parts to do. And with the Monkees, that was a 4-parter. I initially intended to do a 3-parter, but sometimes these stories just take what they take. But I really try to condense things to make to make them digestible. So the Monkees series I did, parts 1 through 3, really ends. That's where the band ends in 70. If you add up those 3 videos, that's a 2-hour documentary. I think that's sufficient. If I can't tell the Monkees story from the beginnings through 1970 in 2 hours, then I've done something wrong. So there is, and there's some, obviously there are some, what I would call trivial things I leave out. So I get comments saying, well, why didn't you mention the B-side of blah, blah, blah? I'm like, look, man, especially if it's not a B-side. Some trivia is so trivial, it can't help the story. It can only drag the story down. It'll make the story lag. And when I write my outlines, there are transitions in between to keep the story flowing, so I keep your attention. If I were to stop to just satisfy 5% of the audience, that would alienate 95% of the audience that don't care about certain things. So those are judgment calls I have to make. And that's why sometimes I'll have a recap at the end to address some of those. I did that with my Spirit video. Spirit is an example of a group that only had roughly 4 albums in the 60s, well, up to 1970. And then the solo period, starting in 1971 roughly, was very spotty up through the next 2 decades. And I didn't think it deserved its own episode, really, because it's very spotty. So I did kind of a regrouping of that period after I got some comments from people to address a couple of the solo albums and certain things, which I think worked. I did that with my Beach Boys series. That was I think the longest series I had. That was 6 parts, and I didn't want it to be 6 parts, but that took 6 parts. I did essentially 1 part just on 1965, or 1 video just on 1965, 1 video on the Pet Sounds Good Vibrations period, which is 1966, and then 1 video dedicated to Smile, which was roughly 1967. So those things took what they took, and I think that worked out. But I typically don't like to do 6 parts if I can avoid it. Scott Farnham met Mickey Dolenz at the Panama Hotel this summer. Hey, how's Mickey doing? Invisible Ray, again, some good suggestions here. Can you do a Rock and Roll Circus special? Nobody ever talks about it. Yeah, that's a good one. The Stones video would probably include that. It never got released till like 30 years later, but I thought that was a very cool thing to do. The effort to do the Stones Rock and Roll Circus was very, very cool, and the fact it didn't air was a shame. There are other things. The Tammy Show, which was from 1964, that had all these groups performing. Another great thing. You've got the Hullabaloos and all these shindigs, Ready, Steady, Go. All these shows were showcasing, were the only place you could see groups in action, really. And so, yeah, it's too bad that the Rock and Roll Circus didn't air, but I think it's a cool time capsule, actually. So what we got here. Janis Joplin would be another good topic. Yeah, Joplin's kind of I'm not a huge Joplin fan. In other words, I don't listen to her stuff much. I like the 2 Big Brother albums, the first 2. I did cover Joplin a bit. I did a video on a group called the Charlatans, which was kind of the pioneering psychedelic group from San Francisco. Joplin was involved with them slightly. She got involved with the San Francisco scene before Big Brother, really. And it's kind of interesting that Chet Helms helped pair her with Big Brother. I mean, can you imagine if she was the lead singer of the Grateful Dead? That could have happened. Or the lead singer maybe of Quicksilver. But she needed a backing band. And her story is more, I guess, tragic than interesting musically for me personally. When she did the Full Tilt Boogie Band, I think she was just flailing. I don't care for that music that much. It's not that it's bad, but I prefer the blues rock to the Full Tilt Boogie. I don't know what you would call that, but and then we lost her early, so let's see some more. Back to the Rock and Roll Circus, prime time with Vinnie B. I think Lennon met Klein during the Rock and Roll Circus. That is true. So the Rock and Roll Circus is almost more important for Beatle fans, because that was where Lennon kind of got the idea to use, I think, Michael Lindsay Hogg. Lindsay Hogg had already done the videos for the Beatles in, I think it was August of '68 for Hey Jude and Revolution. They knew Hogg. They had worked with him several times. But he was hired to do the Rock and Roll Circus. And Lennon showed up there. He's obviously involved in that. He appears on camera, the Dirty Mac he plays. And he briefly met Klein there. and Klein was already, working them. And Michael Lindsay Hogg was, he had a lot of trouble with his rock groups and the films he was doing back in then. Rock and Roll Circus didn't even air. All the problems with the Get Back thing. I mean, the poor guy. You want to get in bed with these rock stars, you're going to probably catch a disease. All right. Tony Iommi, we're still on Rock and Roll Circus with Jethro Tull. Yeah, the few couple weeks Iommi was with Tull is captured on film. That's really cool. The Who obviously showed up the Stones. I mean, the best version of Quick and While He's Away is from that show. And I think that Townsend was really hitting his stride at that point, really starting to hit his stride. And that's why I've heard the Stones didn't really want to release it, because they looked kind of tired in comparison to the Who, which may be true. I think that by the time, the thing I could never understand with some of these rock concerts and stuff, how things were so poorly managed from a stage management perspective, that they were recording some of this stuff, like the Stones Rock and Roll Circus, at like 4, 5, 6 in the morning after having been up all night. So you're up all night popping amphetamine just to try to keep up and doing God knows what. I mean, maybe not going to render the best performance for everybody. Okay, looking at some more comments here. Joey M., I really enjoyed your series on the Beach Boys. I watched them all back to back. Great quality and such interesting history. If you do a series on the Who, I'll definitely be tuned in. Well, I'll definitely do the Who. And I do like to, I love where, like, the Beach Boys had the Smile thing, and it took me, I spent 2 years really researching Smile and the Beach Boys. I wanted to have a really good understanding before I could present that, and through the research, I found a lot of information where I was able to bust a bunch of myths. The Beach Boys have, the bigger the band, the bigger the myth, the bigger the fanboy base, the bigger there's an effort to control that narrative. And I found myself essentially a lone voice in the woods with some of these Beach Boy things that came about that completely destroyed some of the story of Brian Wilson during the Smile period. All kinds of things that aren't brought up. Perfect example is one of the things I did with the Beatles. One of the things that put this channel on the map really was my work on the Beatles Get Back sessions and Let It Be. And I was fortunate enough to have the timing to have done all this before Peter Jackson's documentary came out. Well, my biggest video of all time is The Argument. So this is the George Harrison, Paul McCartney little tiff during the recording, during the sessions for Get Back, Let It Be. And one of the things that was never talked about that I've ever heard was that George Harrison's wife had walked out. So the day he left those sessions was the day his wife walked out. And he had to kind of get his personal life in order. And Harrison never referred to that in the decades that followed. He was very happy to let Paul McCartney take the blame for that argument. But anyway, that was one example of me bringing that forward and just showing it on camera. And so some of that happened with the Beach Boys as well. And I'm happy to say something that just came out, I think, this week is Peter Doggett's book called, it's a Beach Boy book called, I think it's called Surf's Up. And it's something that I think he might also, he's a great writer. He wrote probably the definitive book on the Beatles breakup and the business problems following that. He wrote a fantastic book on Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he loves these groups, but he takes a very balanced approach and can see the humor in some of the ridiculousness of rock stardom. So I find him very entertaining. So I'm very anxious to read his Beach Boys book. How's that for covering 3 bands in one answer? Okay, as I I wonder if Manfred Mann will be a choice in the future. That could be difficult, considering their successful run in the 1970s. That's from Scott McGregor. Scott, that's an example of a group, the way I would do the video. I'm not going to go into the Springsteen era. In fact, I hate that era. I don't like Manfred Mann's 70s stuff at all. I mean, I can't like everything, for sure. But I think the fascinating part of the story, which never gets told, is the 60s era. You know, they had three distinct periods. I guess chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 they're called, that ended in about 71. So that would be my focus. I would let somebody else who really loves the 70s version of Manfred Mann's Earth Band, they can take that and do a better job than I could as far as documenting their history during that time. That's probably how I'll approach it. I have kind of started Manfred Mann already, just collecting information, got a couple books. They're a band that there's not a lot of information out on their 60s material. All very surface stuff, so that takes a little digging. It takes some money to buy publications, to buy books, and I thank my Patreon supporters for helping me to do that. That's what I use some of that income for, is to purchase books and things like that. It's still not always easy to get, particularly if it's an out-of-print book. Not everything is available for download. Any chance of covering the Small Circle of Friends, Roger Nichols group with Paul Williams? Maybe so. Okay, I'm having somebody tell me to turn on my mic here. That should be a little bit better. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Where was I here? Paul Williams. I may do that. I do like Paul Williams' work a lot. Very talented guy. He had the album The Holy Mackerel. I briefly talked about Paul Williams in my Monkeys episode. Let's see here. People busting jokes on me here. All right. Janis is more of a documentary interest than a record to listen to in many circumstances. That's from Art Granke. Yeah, I agree with Art there. Janis Joplin is somebody I don't listen to a lot. I completely appreciate her contribution. I see her more as one of the definitive live performers of the 60s. Just look at Monterey Pop. The Ball and Chain, that is as good of a live performance as there is in the 1960s. And yeah, I think that I just was watching an episode or an interview with Todd Rundgren, and Rundgren was brought in to produce her. Rundgren was hired by Albert Grossman, and he was connected with him, and Grossman represented Joplin. So he said, hey, help Joplin get this album off the ground. And one of the things that Rundgren noticed about Janis Joplin was the fact that she didn't like to record in the studio. That was not her thing. She was bored with it. And I am a fan of studio recordings. I don't pay attention to a lot of live stuff because in the 60s there's not a lot of good live stuff to listen to. Anyway, Rundgren said Janis Joplin's sweet spot was performing in front of an audience. She got that vibe off the audience. That was her thing. And I think maybe that's why some of her studio stuff suffers. And Buffalo Springfield was supposedly on a rock and roll circus, but was removed from the film. No, and that is not true. Buffalo Springfield was finished about 10 months prior to that. Who was on there, though? Taj Mahal was on there. Okay. Dave Clark 5, worthy of analysis, question mark? They were definitely the Beatles' first competition, chart-wise. Many tours, bit of British Wrecking Crew. Okay, Dave Clark 5, they would be a good one to do. I mean, in recent years, there's been some information where they got busted, essentially, for not playing on their records. Dave Clark was apparently some kind of more of a dictator, muscling people a la Colonel Parker to essentially take over the publishing, whereas the contributors that actually helped to write those songs are not represented. They've been lost to time. People are upset about that. Dave Clark, yeah, I guess the first competition chart-wise for the Beatles for about 1 month. and that was Glad All Over, which took 250,000 copies to sell to knock I Want to Hold Your Hand off the top spot in England. After that, they've got some great songs, but the problem with a lot of those English groups, particularly from Liverpool, they couldn't do much after 1965. Dave Clark was able to extend hits through 66, I suppose, but he wasn't, for whatever reason, he didn't embrace the psychedelic era. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go off the deep end, psychedelically speaking, but you have to adopt. Music was changing, so the production styles, Dave Clark was very slow to respond to that. And his stuff by 69, 70 is borderline laughable. So that's something I would talk about, if I did a video on Dave Clark 5. And sometimes, I know that people probably love some of that late Dave Clark 5 stuff from 69 and 70. But, I got to tell, it has got to go with my gut. As I said, I can't like everything, and I don't expect you guys to either. Love and Spoonful, hit and miss. Well, I already did a 2-part video on Love and Spoonful, so you can check out that for hit and or miss. I just saw a good one here. Another big one here that I would like to do, people are asking about the Kinks. That's been a request that's been pretty consistent. And I'm not sure where to end that one. You're not going to get me reviewing much of the album that has Come Dancing on, although I really like that song. And I'm quite familiar with the Kinks' mid-70s period. My cousins had that and always turned me on to that. And but I think I would very comfortably take you through the Kinks through about 1972, the Percy soundtrack, because after that they kind of turn into the 70s Kinks whole hog. So I think up to 70, I think there's probably would require 2 parts to do the Kinks. Some great stuff. The thing about the Kinks, like the Who, they had a lot of unreleased stuff that they just didn't know what to do with. It didn't come out when they recorded it, so it makes a very messy discography to kind of sort out. So those are the things I like to do. For example, the Who, they had an album in 1968. They came out with 2 albums, one for the UK market, one for the United States market. The United States got the Magic Bus on tour with the Who Magic Bus. In the UK, they got direct hits. So both of those are basically compilations, but there's a lot of new material on, especially on the Magic Bus album. I always thought that was just a regular release, a regular studio release, but technically it was a compilation. So there was a follow-up album they were going to do called Who's for Tennis, and this was their manager's idea to capitalize on Wimbledon that was going on around the time, which was kind of lame. But that album was never came out, and it was shelved, and an EP was going to come out, didn't come out. So I can do these albums that never were, and others have done them, and I'll probably incorporate that in both my Kinks history and my Who history. But again, it takes some time to sort out those recordings, not to mention the drama going in within the bands at that time. Man, always a lot of drama. Sunshine Cool Waters asking, can you do a deep dive on the Pentangle? Yes, I can. That's on my schedule, actually. So I've got a schedule already I've been working on as I add to the schedule and keep pushing things back. So my 2026 schedule's basically started. I had originally wanted to do the Pentangle right about now, but I haven't started it. Well, I've started the research of it, let's put it that way. So you'll see that, I'm sure, in 2026. And then along with that, we'll have a thorough backstory of John Renbourn and Bert Jansch as well. Because concurrently with the Pentangle, they were releasing solo albums too, so I'll cover all that chronologically. How about the Trogs? Yeah, how about the Trogs? The Trogs really don't get a lot of love, do they? And I'm really surprised at how rudimentary their sound was, and I guess how musically They weren't skilled musicians, but they were able to still come up with some goods. They have two incredibly rare albums in like 68, 69 period called Cellophane and Mixed Bag. And they were able to kind of get into that psychedelic period without embarrassing themselves, and actually had some pretty good stuff. And, they were just one of those groups that were not destined for that many great things, but they persevered. And like a lot of these 60s groups, how in the world do they keep recording albums? I mean, God love the record companies back then that were still not really that fair to a lot of the artists, but they did allow them to record. Now, I guess you could look at this as, well, the record company kept wanting to recoup their loss from the band and were trying to make money off of them, which is true, but also by virtue of doing that, afforded these groups an artistic place to play music and to create. And that's why we got about, how many of Trog's albums? 4 or maybe 5? I have to look that up. What else we got here? Hey Matt, curious if Eddie Ho is on your list. So I just did this Monkeys series. A guy named Eddie Ho was brought in for their 4th album called Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited. They decided, okay, Mickey, we're not going to have you play drums. There's not any point to it. You're not good enough. We'll get a guy in here that is really good. Producer Chip Douglas brought in his old bandmate from the Modern Folk Quartet. But to answer your question, Monkeys Fan 88, I'm not going to do a video just on Eddie Ho. I get requests for, people have soft spots for these super obscure individuals that did not record an album. There's only so much I can do. The fact that they get mentioned in a Monkeys video at all is my gift to them. I mean, you just can't do everybody. So the answer to that, I'm not going to do a video on Eddie Ho. I will be doing a video on the Modern Folk Quartet, also known as the MFQ. So Eddie Ho is going to get mentioned in not just the Monkeys video, but the MFQ as well. And I think that will be more than adequate to cover his career. A lot of people have, let me give you an example. I had my biggest video, my most watched video of any bands outside of my Beatles work is Paul Revere and the Raiders, if you can believe it. Now, I didn't think this was going to do anything. It was requested and everything, but I didn't think it would be this big of a deal. So I did a 2-parter on them, and I essentially stopped around like 71 or so. They had the big #1 song, the Cherokee Nation song. And then I covered, the album or so after that. Because after that, they were a cabaret act. They were a nostalgia act. They are to this day if they're still going. Well, somebody asked me once, well, didn't you cover so-and-so, some person that was like in the band for 12 years from like 1983 to like 1994 or something. Why didn't you talk about them? Well, because isn't it obvious? I mean, if I actually did what everybody wanted me to, I wouldn't have a channel, quite frankly. Some people just need to get over themselves and their specific likes. Okay. Now I'm getting cranky. You're getting me cranky here. I finished my coffee. I'm on water now. Too early for the bourbon. Tommy, I can barely hear you. I did turn up my volume. My volume I am in the red practically. So I'm trying to not do that. So crank up your volume. I'm eating the mic here, so please bear with me as I work out some of the kinks and some of the video and audio issues on this live stream. I got to get back into doing this. Okay, Art is asking about the Searchers. Yeah, I would love to do the Searchers, the second most popular band out of Liverpool. The first obviously being Jerry and the Pacemakers. Yes, the Searchers are a great group. I love their sound. I love their guitars. Great vocals. A group that didn't do much writing, unfortunately. And all those Liverpool groups that came in the wake of the British invasion, they really fizzled out. I mean, talk about this. This goes to show you. I'll have to talk about this at some point. This goes to show you how different the Beatles were. If you look at all the competition in Liverpool, all their peers from the late 50s till really the dawn of 1963, they were all kind of in it. There was a huge rock scene in Liverpool. Everybody was making money, playing out. Well, the Beatles hit it big. They moved to London. Epstein has all these Liverpool groups signed. And these people, all these Liverpool groups just faded away after, really by early 65, they were done. And the Beatles were destined to outgrow Liverpool. They were bigger than Liverpool. And that's why people from Liverpool were angry with the Beatles. This is a story that has yet to be told. And I'm told that Mark Lewison will be covering this point in his volume 2. The 1964-65 period, apparently the Beatles were hated in Liverpool. And I think some of this was a reaction to them leaving. But they had to leave. They outgrew Liverpool. Their ideas were way outside of Liverpool. And so, yeah, I think you see this in the groups that came out of Liverpool. They weren't able to transition into what would be the folk rock and then eventually the psychedelic period, because that's all Liverpool had really was the beat stuff. And I guess that's the end, long and the short of it. Okay, searchers. All right, what else we got here? Will you be watching the anthology next week? You know what? I completely forgot they were going to be running that on Disney Plus. I've not watched the anthology in about, it's probably 6 or 7 years. And I understand, I'm kind of curious, I'm sure many of us are, the last part is how much more are they going to have in this last section? I think we've seen most of this stuff. I'll probably watch it on Disney Plus. One of the things that has come to my attention with regard to the documentary, the anthology, is all the different versions of it. You know, we had the one that was broadcast in the United States on PBS. You had the VHS version of it. A couple of years later, you got the DVD version. And there's little changes in each one. Then you've got kind of an uncut version you could see on YouTube, which I thought was, they made the proper cuts. I'm quite convinced. And as I started to do this channel, and once we, if you want to really approach the Beatles as a historian and using historical methods, you find that the Beatles telling of the anthology, it's really rather bland. It's really the Fab Four telling of the story, which avoids certain unpleasant topics. That doesn't really do the history justice. But I probably will watch it. You know, this time of year is when we all get a little Beatle fever, a little Beatlemania, because there's some kind of new release. We got the Anthology 4 coming out any day now, and with a few new tracks. What about 15 or so? I forget how many. I have not bought that yet. I don't think I'm going to buy that. I've seen, I think a couple people have gotten it already. I've seen a couple thumbnails on YouTube about some unboxings or something. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not excited about that release. I'm sure many of you will get it. Matt, how old are you? Sorry for my curiosity. Ooh, how old do you think I am? Badfinger, the unluckiest band of all time. Chauncey Gardner, yes, Chauncey, I will be doing Badfinger. Now, let me just explain something to you. I wasn't going to mention this, but now I brought it up. Hold on a second. People ask me, this is kind of an addition to what I just was talking about, Manfred Mann, what I will do and what I will not do. So I want to continue to do 60s groups here, and the last couple of years, come New Year's Eve, I took a little bit of a break and did something from the 70s. 2 years ago, I showed you my 70s poster collection. Last year, I did my 70s album collection. And that was just a way for me to have a little break. And I grew up in the 70s, so that should give you an idea as to what age I am. But having grown up in the 70s, and that's why I was inundated with a lot of 60s music. But that was a time for me that I loved. And as a kid, the colorfulness of the 70s, I still have fond memories of that. So for me to do a 70s episode of some sort is a little retreat for me, and I don't mind taking you guys on a field trip outside of the 60s now and again. I do get requests to do 70s bands. Will you do ELO? Will you do Van Halen? Will you do whatever, and I'm going to keep it to 60s groups. The 70s stuff I would like to do, there's not very many that I would do at this point. As I said, I've got 10-year initial plan with a 5-year option, so that's 15 years worth of doing videos. Quite frankly, I don't know that I can get all my 60s groups done in 15 years. I'll be close, but that doesn't leave a lot of room for other stuff. I mean, I get requests for bands from the 80s and 90s as well. So I have to be selective, and groups like Badfinger, I think I could, they started in the 60s. They were connected to the Beatles in a very big way, so that makes some sense. That story is a interesting story for two reasons. The obvious reason, it's tragic. But the other reason is the music. So the thing I try to focus on is the music on all my videos and all my band histories. And in the case of Badfinger, they've got a fairly rich catalog. And I have it all. So, and I was a big fan back in my younger days, and I kind of fell away from Badfinger in the past 20 years or so. And but I would like to revisit them. I actually have, there's some local ties to them, believe it or not, here in Milwaukee. So that's a group I would like to do. How about a Bogey video? You know what? He's over there. He is fast asleep. He's actually allowing me to do this video uninterrupted, and I was going to even bring him up here on my desk here for you to see him if he makes his way over here, but I don't want to wake the sleeping dog. How about Live Aid? Will I do Live Aid? Well, that I remember that day. That would be a fun one to do, though. I mean, getting to the 80s is getting outside of my intention of this channel. Though I wouldn't mind doing something like that. That would be something that would be a fun one to do. So let's see what else we got here. Oh, here we go. I just kind of addressed this. What is your opinion on late 70s, early 80s bands that heard of a 60s sound? I don't have much opinion on them because I don't follow them. I mean, some of that Paisley Underground. I mean, I never was, just because a group had a 60s sound in the 80s, I did not flock to them. I don't like Oasis. I've never liked Oasis. They're okay, some of their hits, but I found them to be not that interesting of a group. I mean, pleasant music. But in the 80s, I'll tell you, I was, in high school and college during that period, and that's when I started to become a full-time 60s music collector. Well, full-time, not full-time, I should say, as my pocketbook allowed. I always was working. I had a job since I was the age of 9. So I typically had a little bit of spending money, and that's some of these albums you see behind me, I bought as like a 13-year-old. So anyway, I did buy stuff in the 80s. There were groups I did like. And all the stuff, in the 80s, you still had the radio, the soundtrack to our lives were playing literally outside our doors, in our cars and at parties. So I was exposed to all those great 80s groups. The techno pop era, And then you have the MTV generation. You got the college bands like U2 and REM. All that was a part of my life. So a lot of the groups that sounded, quote, sounded 60s like, they had a lot of competition. I guess REM would be they were one of the groups that caught my ear because of the guitar. Being a Byrds fan, I noticed that. And then in the 90s, I'll tell you this story, giving you a little bit information on my journey here, my musical journey. By the early 90s, I had a couple of roommates, and we used to throw these great parties. And I always had to have a selection of new music because I couldn't just play the Archies, My peers would not have appreciated that. So the good thing, if you could throw a good party, you can put together a good music list, or in those days there were not playlists, you had a mixtape, or you have somebody spinning records or whatever. CDs were out by then. You could pop in a CD. We didn't have multiple CD disc players at that time yet. I couldn't afford them. So anyway, I was buying, I had like Pearl Jam's first or second album, and I was getting some of that stuff because I could pop that on at a party. And then I realized, what the hell am I spending all this money on this shit for? I mean, to buy a CD was like $15. I could buy 4 used albums for that amount. So I made a decision in about 1993 to not really purchase anything. Well, to basically, let me put it this way, to just focus on the stuff I wanted to research, which was 60s music. And I bought stuff outside of that. I've got, my collection is 40s, 50s. I got stuff from the 70s. I still bought stuff from the 90s. I was a big fan of the Black Crowes. And a group called Cry of Love I really enjoyed. So I did buy stuff outside, but I was very selective. So that's a little bit of my journey there. Sorry to be a little long-winded there. Fit to be tie-dyed. Hi, Matt. Hope all is well. Paul, good to hear from you. Good to see you here on the stream. Martin McGrath is asking, Matt, why is Sean Ono mentioned more in Beatles chats than George Martin and Brian Epstein? Is Sean the fifth Beatle? Well, Sean has been out. He's putting himself out there a little more, which I appreciate. He's now, the face of the Lennon estate. Yoko Ono has passed the torch to him some years ago. So I think, he's obviously Yoko's too old to really be that person. And I think the more we see Sean talk, he seems to be pretty open. He seems to be pretty willing to talk about things. Interesting about the latest release that sometime in New York City, Power to the People, I think it was called. And it's interesting how the song that makes that whole collection notorious was not included. I've got some ideas about that. Do I do a video on it? I may do one. But good to see that Sean is out there and about. Okay. Have you ever considered covering the small faces? Well, I already did the small faces. Shame on you for not looking at my channel very deeply. Just Moody. Yes, I have a two-part video series on the small faces. Love the small faces. One of my favorites of all the British groups I listen to. I probably listen to them the most after the Beatles. Big Small Faces fan. Love the players in the band. They're all great. Marriott's voice, great. Wrote their own stuff. Cutting edge stuff. Ronnie Lane, one of my favorite bass players. Can't say enough about him. So check out that video series. Miguel Riscato is asking me, Matt, what is the reason behind the late arrival of Beatles songs to YouTube? I don't know that. Can't answer that, actually. I know they had a late arrival to iTunes, that's for sure. And that was because of a dispute with Apple computers. And the Beatles, Apple, obviously they established that, registered that name in the 60s. And then Apple computers came up through late 70s using that name when the Beatles were really not much of anything anymore. Apple kind of was dormant. So there was some issues about Apple computers using Apple. The Beatles approached them about this. And there wasn't a lawsuit, I don't think, but there was kind of an agreement that so long as Apple computers didn't get into the music industry, they could use it. But obviously they got into the music industry in the biggest way possible with iTunes. So there was some settlement. So the Beatles essentially sold out and allowed them to use that name, I guess. That's the long and the short of it, I guess. Here's somebody asking about the biggest myth I've uncovered is a double fantasy received very bad reviews in America before John Lennon died. I've assembled about 50 reviews published before December 9th, 1980. This is Garrett Jeff. That's an interesting project. 50 reviews published before. If all 50 are negative, that would say something. Obviously, when somebody the stature of Lennon dies, and at that time and in the way he died, any album he would have released would have sold. Rock and roll, that would have sold. Had sometime in New York City been released then, that would have sold well. So I always kind of liked Lennon's songs on that album just because it was a return to pop music. I was a young teenager at the time he got shot, so I appreciated that. I love the song Watching the Wheels. I still think that's one of his best songs. And I don't listen to that album much. But, the history around that, to be continued on this channel. I would like to talk more about some of that. There are some topics that I will go outside of the 60s, and that will mostly have to do with the Beatles, and the solo Beatles, and so I've done about 4 or 5, maybe 6 reviews on Beatles solo albums with fellow YouTuber John Heaton. And so the Beatles are the one exception to going outside of my 60s area here. John Yaruso, we're back talking. There's several comments here about the Dave Clark 5. Most of them essentially exposing the myths of their history. John says here, I have yet to find a DC5 video where they're actually playing live. They're always miming. Now, this is an interesting thing that Dave Clark wanted to do because most shows in the 60s were mimed. Now, some people think this is very cheesy, but really it was an economic thing. To have an actual studio outfitted for a live recording is extremely difficult, extremely expensive, and extremely time-consuming. What most of the time happened is your TV shows were given instrumental tracks. It almost always was the same track from the record, and then the group would either mime to it or they would sing live vocals to it. So Dave Clark 5 realized this. He said, you know what I'm going to do? Because a lot of songs had fade outs, and that looks kind of ridiculous when you're miming a fade out. So he usually had cold stops on all of his songs because if they were going to be doing them on television, it would just look more natural. So he was very in tune with that, with television. And I've never heard any live stuff of them. And, I guess they were just a studio band. I don't want to hear any stuff live by the Dave Clark 5 any more than I want to hear stuff live by Herman's Hermits, quite frankly. Will I be doing a video on Herman's Hermits, you ask? Yes, I will. I actually like Herman's Hermits. Okay, lots of Dave Clark 5 here. Okay. 4D Man says, I don't feel like I'm missing anything by ignoring the revamped anthology. I got the CD number 4. Even that overlaps with what Apple already reissued on the box sets. Yeah, I know a lot of you are going to probably buy Anthology 4. Some of you might even buy the box set, the vinyl. I'm kind of at my young age here, because I do realize that 80% of my audience is older than me. I'm actually starting to scale back and be selective on what I buy. I mean, there was a time period when darn near everything that was released by the Beatles, in the 90s up until about, well, the box sets, I suppose, I would usually get because it was unique. It was something new. They were usually well put together. And I thought it was a good way to curate their legacy. I don't think that's been going on in the last couple of years, particularly that absolute crap documentary Beatles 64. That was shameful. If that's what they were going to be dishing out to us, if that's what they think young people want, well, all right. But yeah, Anthology 4, I just did, I should tell you, I wanted to mention this. Anthology 4 is about to come out. This is also the 2-year anniversary of Now and Then, the Beatles' so-called final single from 2023. The single that should have really been a part of Anthology 4, which would have made an Anthology 4 make more sense anyway. But they jumped the gun, Apple that is. They felt the need to get Now and Then out and done, and what are we going to do? How are we going to... Let's use this Beatles single and couple it with probably the most accessible release to garner a younger crowd, the Red and the Blue albums. I thought this was an absolute mess. And I think, I got to believe that they also decided to release Now and Then at that time, jumping the gun. Hey, we got to get this out while we still got 2 Beatles alive. I think that may have been an issue. Anyway, I just did one of my first posting on Substack. I did an article on Now and Then, 2 years on. I will have to remember to put that link in when I post this video on YouTube. I'll put that link in the description below so you can check out that. And kind of a brutal takedown of the song, as you might imagine, coming from me. If you saw my video that I did on it 2 years ago, which it's funny. I think the song is largely forgotten, and all the hype at the time was just that, hype. Okay, moving along here. Your love videos were great. Thank you, Kent. Yeah, I did a video on love and kind of a recap. No, I did a 2-parter on love. More requests for the Trogs here. Have you heard the Trogs tapes? Yes, I have. Those are funny. That's the great thing about the Trogs. They much lampooned. It's kind of like Spinal Tap probably borrowed a little bit from some of the Trogs tape stuff, but Spinal Tap era stuff, that's kind of an original. So let's see here. Request for The Who. I'm coming up on an hour here. I only wanted to do an hour. I don't know how long my voice is going to hold out here. But if we cross over into the noon period, I could actually bring out a cocktail, right? Not going to do that. Okay. Okay, we got more questions about the 2000s indie era. Fleet Foxes, the Shins, Animal Collective. I do like Fleet Foxes. There is some music that do reach me in the more modern era. What I call new music is basically everything since the turn of the 21st century. So the last 25 years to me is all new. There isn't really, there's not a lot of progression in that 25 years. Anytime a type of music is talked about, it's kind of referred back to something that was older. So it's hard for me to, I find stuff, Disc Magazine and some of these magazines used to put out their magazine with a CD plastered on the cover with new artists. I actually would find new artists through physical music on that CD on the cover of those magazines. And I haven't done that in a while, but I found some wonderful newer groups that are not mainstream, by the way. Mainstream groups, I mean, I find to be, those are the laptop groups we're hearing that are get all the plays. Those aren't the people that are going to set up and tour regionally, bands that are just trying to, basically playing for the love of it, trying to garner a following on their own without the machinery behind it, meaning the record companies and all, and selling your soul. That could be a video topic, right? Okay, looks like I fixed my audio problem. Thank you. We got Kinks. We got lots of British stuff we're asking for. I won't tell you about. There's groups out there that I've never gotten requests for, which kind of surprised me. I won't mention those because I'm sure people want to hear those anyway. Chocolate Watch Band. There's an American group. Little garagey there. Smoke. The Smoke. More British stuff. Yeah, I saw Giles Martin on a video yesterday. I forgot what he was on. Word in My Ear. I think he was on that podcast. Very good podcast. And I always like hearing Giles Martin talk. He's kind of in a tough spot. He's, not in a spot where he can really pontificate too much. I mean, he's on the payroll, so it's not like he can step out of line too much. Let's see here. Kraftwerk are a band on their own. Yes, they are. Yeah, I mean, some of these groups do get mentioned on my channel for certain reasons, but I wouldn't be doing a band history on Kraftwerk, for example. Not doing Dr. Hook. Not doing Dr. Hook. Some fun songs, though, some fun songs. So some people are asking all kinds of different requests. Here's one for the Grassroots from Jeff P. Yeah, so there's a lot of the bigger groups in the United States anyway. You have this period 1968 to 1970 where the AM radio 60s rock, I guess, really gets short shrift because they're not the cool groups. They're not the FM radio groups like Cream and Traffic and the Airplane. Groups like the Grassroots would be a good example, who had hits, up until about 71. Groups like the First Edition, the American Breed, a lot of these pop groups that really struggled to find an audience, and they fizzled out. So somebody's saying here, Floyd the Barber's asking, if you're going to do a bad finger, you also do the history of the Raspberries. No, I don't. Raspberries, there's the Beatle fascination with the Raspberries to me has always just been that. I've never been a fan of the Raspberries, and they might make an interesting history, but they ain't 60s. There's no really connection to the 60s other than a leftover sound. And I don't dislike the Raspberries hits, that's all I really know. But if you want to talk about something similar who had bigger hits, who were a little bit more FM friendly, I guess would be ELO. And my buddy Paul's a big fan of ELO, and I know the hits, but ultimately they're not a group I really revere that much. I prefer, in terms of the 70s, I'm more a Bowie guy. CSNY. I love Heart. I love Free. I'm a little more on the blues rock. And I do like some of the singer-songwriter stuff as well. But it's a wide area. And the power pop stuff I like it, but I'm not gaga over it. So some groups just will fall by the wayside for me. One group I really love is a Big Star. So that would be one. But they're not a 60s group either, are they? So at some point I'm going to have to make some decisions here. And like I say, it is nice to take a little bit of a vacation from the 60s. But that's a vacation more for me and for you guys as well. But I won't be able to really do full-fledged doing 70s bands. I won't have the time. If I live long enough, perhaps, but a couple. But, Big Star, yes. Elliot Mintz is on here. I was so proud of my godson Sean when he co-wrote Primrose Street with James McCartney. I have not listened to that yet. Maybe I heard a part of it. I got to get back to that. I heard it's quite good. Yeah, the Beatles' sons. Boy, what a tough position to be in. But they've all done some really good music. I mean, Sean Lennon's done some interesting stuff over the years. And again, there's only so much time in the day to listen to music. And unfortunately with this channel, I love doing this channel, by the way, and I'm dedicated to continuing it for several years yet. But it doesn't afford me the time to listen to a lot of stuff that people recommend for me. People recommend, oh, have you seen this listen to this podcast or seen this channel? And I rarely do. And, I've got stuff going on outside of this, I've got a life, obviously, but there's so much time I have to spend in creating the content for this channel. It unfortunately does not leave me much free time to do anything outside of the research of this channel. And in fact, I listen to music in a completely different way since I started this channel. And I'm very kind of sad to tell you that I don't have the time to listen to the stuff I even want to listen to. I'm so busy. It takes so much time to put these videos together. That consumes me. And when I do, so I've got my huge playlist. In fact, the term Pop Goes the 60s was started when I made a playlist in my iTunes 20 years ago. And it basically is all the 60s stuff I want to listen to. And I don't know how many thousands of songs it is, but if you played it from start to finish, it'd go 18 days or so. I still don't have all my stuff in there. So what I do to listen to music, and it's such a treat for me to listen to my own playlist, my Pop Goes the 60s playlist, and I do that when I'm working on the house. So I've been downstairs recently. I've been trying to get some painting done. So I put that music on in the background, and I really enjoy listening to music while I'm working with my hands. And I've had some projects over the summer through the fall now where I've been able to do that. So that's a real treat for me. But yeah, I don't listen to music. I don't listen to the Beatles that much. And there's a way I kind of like to listen to them, and I don't have the time. Let's see. Doc Dacus. Yes, you should. My audio should be okay. Don't know if that's a new comment. So, yeah, I'm trying to make sure I get all my I'm showing. I've got my meter right here that looks proper. So I'm right where I need to be according to the meter I'm looking at here on my screen. So I apologize if I sound quiet to some people, but turn up your volume. I'll keep tweaking things as I go. Big Star has a box tops 60s connection too. That's true, but Big Star, they were not recording in the 60s, so that would be me doing a 70s band, pure and simple. If I were to do Big Star, another sad story. That great stuff, and their stuff still sounds fresh to me. That's what really, I think, shows the depth of a great band, is if their stuff 50, 60 years later still sounds fresh. And Big Star's stuff does to me. Have you ever done Nancy and Lee? No, not yet. Boy, that would be an interesting one to do. Nancy Sinatra is an interesting topic. She's got some songs that are really good, actually. And the Lee Hazelwood connection, them together, is one of the more interesting combinations in the 60s where you get two people completely different voices that were able to make some interesting music together, and some of which was rather psychedelic too, which you wouldn't think. Yes, Anne Margaret as well. Yeah, so obviously, as you can see here, there is a huge amount of stuff that I can do. And I typically take a lot of requests from my Patreon supporters, and I have discussions with them about stuff, and they've actually, some of them have actually been able to forward some music to me that would help me put something together on this channel on a band history, for example. So it's really, you know, since they take so long to do, and I'm usually working on 5 or 6 at the same time in various parts of completion. So I get kind of excited when the outline is coming together and I find some really good information and I can include that. And so that part is fun for me. And I'll never be bored, that's for sure. But I'm going to just keep doing these and, you know, keep listening to you guys. And the reason I wanted to do a live stream here after not doing one for 2 years is to just get some feedback. I get most of my feedback from my Patreon supporters, and I got to do more with them as well. And I've got to make time for that. So you'll probably see a couple more live streams from me in the future, and maybe I'll do it more regularly. And especially now we have some Beatles stuff coming out. That's always fun to talk about, and you guys can tell me about what everybody else is saying, and that's how I'll get my information. So I think I'd like to stop it here. I've got a dentist appointment this afternoon, so I've got to hit that. But this was a good test for me to get back in shape with doing live streams, and I'm thankful to everybody who joined in. So what I'll do is I'll post this on the channel as soon as I can get it up there. And for those of you who are still looking to, if you're looking to help out this channel anyway, you know, I've got popgoesto60s.com. I've got my merchandise there, so that's one place you can go. And I'm going to try to add more things there in 2026. I haven't added anything there in about half a year. Quite a lot of cool things. Things like this, mugs. I like the mug. I use my mugs quite a bit. This one in particular. I've got pint glasses as well. Those are the big sellers, some t-shirts and some other odds and ends. So always very grateful to anybody who can help me out. And that's why I have this channel. And to continue this, I'm going to continue to need your support. And I appreciate all the subscriptions, all the comments that you leave, and all the sharing. That really helps grow my channel. I've been growing a lot, and I want to continue to doing that to reach other people and to reach younger people as well, so I can help pass the torch here with some of this great music, and because we want other people to hear it as well. So you've been a big part of that, and I want to thank you. So I'm going to sign off now, and I will see you again here in the very near future. Thank you for watching Pop Goes the 60s.